Isn't the 308 Winchester outdated, old, positively decrepit? Well, maybe so, maybe not. What's for sure is that there are a lot of misconceptions about the cartridge out there. How good or how bad is the 308? Today, we're going to do some myth busting. When I consult my notes here, there are some interesting things that pop up right away. First, the cartridge is 70 years old, actually a bit more. It was introduced in 1952 and is one of the few cartridges that was a civilian round before it became a military round. A couple years after it was introduced to the hunting market and the target shooting market, the U.S. military massaged performance parameters a bit and then adopted it as a 7.62 by 51 NATO cartridge. But for the purposes of our discussion today, let's just call it the 308. So first, let's explore what the 308 does. Then we'll discuss what it doesn't. And then we're going to address some specific myths about the 308. What the 308 does? Well, it fits into short actions. This is something that its ancestor, the 30-06, does not do. Some people make a big deal about this. The 308 shoots medium weight 30 caliber bullets of, say, about 147 grains, which was oddly, I don't know why 147 grains, but a lot of the early 30 caliber full metal jacket FMJ military projectiles weighed 147 grains in the 30-06 and then in the 308 as well. Right up to about 180 grain bullets. Shoots that weight range pretty well. The 180 grain bullets are getting on the heavy side for the balance of performance, velocity that the 308 can provide. And this is because the 308 cartridge does not have a great big propellant chamber inside that cartridge case. It produces, really, with that spectrum of bullets, a relatively pedestrian velocity, anywhere from about 2,400 feet per second up to about 2,800 feet per second, depending on projectile weight. With those 150 to 165 grain bullets that are best balanced for the 308, you're going to be in that 2,700 to 2,800 feet per second range. The 308 has an unusual reputation for accuracy. It's one of those cartridges that from its birth just provided easy accuracy, and it does so to this day. And in big part, this is, how shall I put it, promoted or aided, assisted by the fact that a lot of companies build match-grade ammunition for it. Consider the gold medal match line by Federal Ammunition, which is historically loaded with 168 grain Sierra Match King bullet in the 308 version, and has been the round of choice for medium to short range target competitive shooters and SWAT and other sniper teams for decades and decades. Very good load. The 308 provides super barrel life. If you take care of your rifle, it's not unusual to get up to 5,000 rounds in a barrel. That's really pretty extraordinary. And it's a fact of, or I should say a characteristic of having a quite moderate propellant reservoir behind a reasonably large bullet. That cartridge is not even close to overbore. It very efficiently and effectively burns all of the propellant in the case without causing a lot of erosion to the throat or the rifling, the chamber throat or the rifling. So all of these things add up to another desirable characteristic. It generally has quite moderate recoil. It's not a heavy recoiler. So let's now transition to the characteristics that the 308 doesn't provide. What it doesn't do? Well, piggybacking off that last comment, it doesn't kick hard. And this is a really good thing for shooters that may be a bit recoil sensitive, for beginning shooters, youth shooters that want to shoot an authoritative cartridge, and so forth. The 308 does not shoot heavy for caliber bullets very well. And here's where a lot of people that argue that the 308 is just a shorter 30-06 go wrong. It's a simple fact of physics that with a smaller propellant chamber, you simply cannot drive heavy 30 caliber bullets effectively out of the 308 case. Velocities drop below that kind of acceptable trade-off threshold. Look at these bullets right here. You've got a typical match bullet. This is a Sierra Match King, 155 grainer, quite a popular weight for certain purposes with the 308. Beside 112 grain, 30 caliber version of a Hornady ELDX. This bullet has a very high BC and hits very hard at long distances if you can drive it fast enough. You really want to push it at, I don't know, 2,800 feet per second out of the muzzle, ideally. The 308 won't come anywhere near that. And in fact, that bullet is probably too long with too fine an entry on the nose to even work through 308 magazines and feed reliably into the chambers. So the 308 is not just a shorter 30-06 for that reason. It has a curtailed performance with it, or no performance at all. It just isn't compatible with them, with those heavy for caliber bullets that really make the 30 caliber so great at what it is. With the lighter weight bullets, such as this 150 grain soft point, 165 grain soft point boat tail, and 180 grain Nosler partition bullet, it's very good. It actually provides reasonably good velocity with the 180 grain bullet and good velocity with the 165 and the 150. Near enough to the 30-06 with those two lighter weights that no deer and no shooter is really going to know the difference. But if you want to shoot extreme range with the 30 caliber, the 308 isn't compatible with the right bullets for that. And I'm not talking 1,000 yards. I'm talking a mile, 1,760 yards or more. Now, on that note, look, we're talking about what the 308 doesn't, right? It doesn't provide really good performance past 600 yards. And to many shooters, 600 yards is long range, but to a proper long-range shooter, that's mid-range. That's just where it starts getting interesting. 1,000 yards is real interesting, and 1,200, 1,400 yards is a lot of fun. The 308's not good at those. I've shot the 308 a considerable amount out to 1,200 yards, and I can tell you this, at 600 yards, it's great. It's very capable. 800 yards, it starts struggling. You get a lot of wind drift, and you're dialing a whole bunch of adjustment into your scope. 1,000 yards, I think, even with the best 308 bullets, is about the outer limits of that cartridge. And past there, it's just, I don't want to be impolite, but it's hopeless, right? Compared to something like a 300 PRC, which is a really good extreme range cartridge, the 308 just doesn't have it. Even the 6.5 Creedmoor, and especially cartridges like the 6.5 PRC or the 6.5 by 284 Norma, those are very good 1,000-yard cartridges. They really kind of surpass the 308 about that 400 or 500 yard mark simply because they have much better wind bucking ability. What else does the 308 not do well? Well, it doesn't shoot flat. We talked about that. So if you're dialing, you're going to be going way up on your dial. Doesn't buck the wind well. So if you're shooting in a lot of wind, you better have your inner guru turned on full throttle, because you're going to have your work cut out to compensate for that wind. I had a friend once that was shooting a 308, and I was shooting, I believe it was a 280 Ackley improved with a very good high BC load. We were shooting 1,000 yards. And he was holding something like 20 feet off the target, and every little variation in strength was causing him to hit right or left, right or left. I was holding about 6 feet off the target and ringing it every time. And he's a good shooter. It was just a very stark example of what a fairly stiff wind will do, and the difference between a slower cartridge with just a medium BC bullet and a fast cartridge with a high BC bullet. 308, I'm going to ruffle some feathers now with this one. The 308 is not a great elk cartridge. Yes, it will kill an elk. It'll even kill an elk out there at fairly long shots, 400 yards or more, but it's not good at it. Now, I've had guys who ruffle up and say, well, I shot an elk with one shot at 410 yards and he dropped on the spot. How can you say it's not good for that? Well, do it 9 more times and see how many times you get that same result. And then do it 10 times with something like a 300 Winchester Magnum and observe the differences, the on-impact, visible result differences when you're shooting a heavier bullet faster out of a Magnum cartridge. Now, the 308 isn't a bad hunting cartridge. In fact, it's very good at certain things. It's just not what I consider a great elk cartridge. Now, if all elk were shot inside 200 yards, I would not be saying that, because inside 200 yards, it's a very solid elk cartridge. But when you get out into this wide open Western country where I live and where so many elk are hunted, you may be shooting across a canyon or a big windswept flat in alpine country. Man, you've got to have a cartridge with reach and with authority on the far end of that reach. And the 308 falls a little bit short of that. This is really a function of not having adequate bullet weight combined with adequate velocity. You can get one or the other, but the 308 cannot combine, say, a 180 grain bullet with really useful high-end velocities. And this is exacerbated, kind of on a side note, by the tendency today towards short barrels. A 308 should have a 22-inch barrel or more to get great velocity out of it. So many shooters these days are shooting 20s. They're not too bad, but 18 and even 16-inch barrels out of a 308 really cripples that cartridge at extended distances. Again, it's fine inside 200 yards, but if you're going to shoot at an elk at 450 yards, that is not a good combination. So what else? I wanted to talk about specialty matches, long-range matches with the 308, because some shooters are going to say, what about F-class guys that shoot 308 at 1,000 yards every weekend? And what about Palma match guys that shoot iron sights and 308s at 1,000 yards? So there's a reason that they stipulate 308 only, or service rifle cartridge like either a 308 or a 5.56 NATO for those disciplines. It's because it makes it harder. It's much harder to shoot 1,000 yards with a 308 than it is with something like, 6.5 PRC or a 7mm PRC. And it makes it fun. If you're shooting a service rifle only cartridge and you're trying to milk the most out of it. I know Palma shooters that are shooting 30-inch 308 barrels. They're shooting cartridge cases with small rifle primer pockets in it because they'll handle higher pressures than SAMI spec, than the standard pressure, right? And they are hot rodding those 308 cartridges like a guy with nitrous in his sports car. It's impressive, but it's a little bit scary, and they're getting very impressive velocities out of the 308, more than is reasonably safe in some cases. So those guys shoot 1,000 yards and have a lot of fun, but it's not good at it. Let's transition now and talk about myths of the 308. And there are a few of them. Probably the one that I hear the most is that, well, it's got to be the best sniper cartridge out there because the U.S. military uses it. Well, they do a little, and they did a lot more in the past because they've found better cartridges now. Also, bless their hearts, the U.S. military, or perhaps I should say, whatever division within the U.S. military is making choices, is not necessarily known for always picking the very best tool for the task. Their research process alone takes so long that by the time they finally choose something, there's often something that's evolved and become better. But I'm not going to get off on that train. That's a dangerous train to go down. But what I can say is that although a lot of military and law enforcement snipers have used and continue to use the 308 for decades, it's not the best thing for the task. There are military guys that have migrated to 6.5 Creedmoor, 6.5 by 284 Norma, 300 Winchester Magnum, 338 Lapua. They've looked very hard, and some special units have adopted the 7mm PRC, the 300 PRC. These are cartridges that provide a significantly elevated level of precision and performance at extreme range. So that old argument that, well, it must be the best because the military snipers use it, doesn't hold water. That's a myth. How about another one? The 308 kills like a sledgehammer. This one's a little harder to quantify because if you're shooting a whitetail at 75 yards and you've got a good bullet in your rifle, you bet. That is a fantastic, very authoritative combination. But if you're shooting an elk at 400 yards, you're on the edge of what that cartridge is capable of and good at. Again, you can kill something, but to kill it cleanly and with authority and quickly is sometimes a different matter, right? So I will say that is that conception that the 308 is just one of the greatest hunting cartridges ever designed, I'm going to call myth on that as well. Within its comfort zone, it's terrific. But outside its comfort zone, it falls flat pretty quickly. We can just look at the 30-06 combined with a 220 grain round nose partition bullet, which is actually reasonably good for the biggest moose and bison and even mountain grizzly bears. And when you're careful, even a coastal brown bear, 308 cannot match that performance because it can't shoot that bullet effectively. But I do want to state before moving on, just so that you guys don't, break out the cauldron, start heating up the tar, and pop open a pillow full of feathers and ride me out on a rail. The 308 is really good within its comfort zone. For me, again, that's inside 200 yards, maybe 250, but inside 200 yards is just terrific. Another commonly known thing about the 308 is it's been in military service since the 1950s. Not so. It's been in specialized use by certain personnel or branches of the U.S. military since the mid-1950s. But in reality, when it comes to broad spectrum military use, it was one of the shortest lived military cartridges in U.S. history. It was adopted, announced, whatever, in 1954. And by the time the Vietnam War was really heating up, just a decade later, it was already being phased out in favor of the controversial M16 and its little so-called mouse cartridge. And since the Vietnam War, again, the 308 has simply served in limited capacities. Machine guns, heavy machine guns, sniper rifles for several decades, certain other uses that many of you probably know more about than I do. So funny enough, the upshot of all this is that the 308 is actually one of the more popular and yet more scorned cartridges in the hunting and precision shooting realm today. I host the Backcountry Hunting Podcast, and a couple of years ago, I did an episode called 308 and the 6.5 Need More. And man, it got so much response, good response from listeners. And it was one of the most popular of all the episodes we published that year. If you're interested in a deeper dive into the comparison between those two, look that up. You should be able to search that on the Backcountry Hunting Podcast. So that kind of leads us to the question, what cartridge is better than the 308? Well, if you're a Western hunter, I'm going to be rude and say almost anything, right? It's just not fast enough with high enough BC bullets to be competitive in the Western hunting scene today. Public land, drastically lowered deer numbers, especially mule deer numbers, and far more limited access, huge hunting pressure, declining opportunities, special draw tags. Hunters now want really effective tools because the opportunities here in the West are getting far more restricted and more prized. And so the 308 just doesn't have what it takes for most of us hunting the West. Any of the modern high-octane cartridges on the scene will provide better performance than a 308. However, for target work, it does pretty good. Still pretty popular among guys that want a surplus type rifle or want to be able to buy cheap surplus ammunition. But really, if you're just a target shooter, you're better off with a 6.5 Creedmoor. Kicks less, significantly less than the 308. Has a lot less wind drift and bullet drop at extended ranges. We're talking 1,000-yard shooting now. And in fact, it's, for the most part, now more widely available in a better diversity of factory loads than the 308 is. So is there any realm really in which the 308 absolutely rocks, where it's maybe the best option of them all? That's debatable. Arguably it's very hard to beat for hunting out to mid-range on deer-sized game. It's also terrific in the M1A semi-automatic type of rifle platform. I have an old editor friend that used to work in downtown LA, and he kept a Springfield M1A Scout Squad rifle. It's a 20-round magazine. He had 10s because that was what was legal in LA, with an 18-inch barrel and just a super cool little rifle. And when asked why he kept it around, he always would say, It was in case he needed a get-out-of-town gun when the zombie apocalypse hit, right? Metaphor for some kind of disaster and the use that a survival gun would be put for. And when questioned why that specific choice, he would dourly say, because with the right bullet, it'll shoot through cinder block walls. That's a topic for another time, survival guns and cinder block walls. So folks, if you love your .308, there's no reason to leave it. It's a reasonably versatile cartridge for close to medium range shooting, and it does a very good job at that. On the other hand, if you're looking for the best of the best for any specific task, there are better options. These days, even the Army thinks so.